Hi, everybody. So good afternoon. I'm sorry for the snafu. I thought it was a little weird that we were chatting together and nobody was in the waiting room. And someone had said when I checked in that these tours were full. So I said, nobody wants to go on a Montclair Art Museum virtual tour. Anyway, glad to see you. I recognize some of your faces from classes that I've taken with Karen DeLuca and Nancy Ivino. And so I think it's kind of cute that I'm doing this. But my name is Cheryl Slutsky, and I'm here with you today to go on this semi-virtual tour. The name of the tour is Undaunted Spirit, Native Art of North America. I've been a docent at the Montclair Art Museum since 2013. I have an art background, and I'm also a museum trustee. So this is this particular tour that I'm giving. It's the first one that I've done in this for this topic in this time and place. And you know, the Montclair Art Museum has a vast collection of Native American art because the museum began when it opened in 1914. A lot of that was due to the philanthropic gift of Florence Rand Lang. Many of you may know about Florence Rand Lang. Her mother, prior to her, had amassed a very large collection of what was then called Native American art or Indian art. We don't do that anymore because it's a pejorative. But anyway, she was a member of the Montclair Art Colony back at the turn of the century. When I'm talking about the turn of the century, I'm talking about the 1800s to the 1900s. And she gave at that point, at the beginning, over $50,000 to fund the building of the museum. And she also donated over 200 works that in her collection of Native American art, some of which were her own, things that she owned, and things that her mother owned. And so we have now over 4,000 individual pieces, artifacts of all kinds of art, ceramics, basketry, clothing, totem poles, and I'm talking, full-size totem poles. And this particular Rand Gallery, and if you've been to the museum, when you walk into the front entrance of the museum, and we're going now, that is Lehman Court. We're walking into the Rand Gallery, and you can see the heading that we just passed that said Undaunted Spirit, Native Art of North America. So one of the downfalls, there are great things about doing a Zoom virtual tour. We're using a program called Matterport that you see this very, very often these days. And if you're house hunting, very often people who are house hunting have this as an option. If they don't want to actually go inside a house, they can go through it with Matterport. So we're actually right now walking around the gallery. This is what is installed right now. And there is a lot of plexiglass, and so it makes looking at a lot of the objects a little bit difficult. But if we here looking at a collection of ceramic pieces, many of which were donated. This is what you see when you walk in. This is a fairly new installation. The gallery goes through various tweaks and whatnot, and we can never show everything that's in the collection. It's unfortunate. Nobody would ever have the space to do it. But this most recent one talks more about the history of a people Native Americans who have been able to persevere, and that's where we get the title Undaunted Spirit, because despite oppression and colonialism and the European discovery of the North continent of America, they've still been able to maintain traditions and have used their art their skills from centuries ago. These days, contemporary Native American artists still use traditional techniques, but they incorporate newer materials, newer themes, and relevant issues. So we're standing here right now, and this is the beginning, and what we're looking at in this case are artifacts, are items that might have been actually made for the tourist trade way back in those first 3 vitrines that you see hanging on the wall. If you might see a tusk in the corner. We just lost it, Charles. You can go back. There we go. That's carved, and it would have been something that was sold to sailors, about 150 years ago or so. So juxtaposition to that, in the next case, we see what are 3 actual skateboards. This is a contemporary artist, and he's taken these 3 skateboards and painted scenes, pictures that are relevant to his background. The center one is Chief Geronimo, and the one on the right, it's a gentleman who's wearing an army uniform, and that was one of his, it was either his father or his grandfather. So you can see the trajectory, the way we go from one to the next. The gallery is going to change. This particular installation is actually going to change yet again in probably in the next 6 months or so. And we're also going to be hiring a new curator of Native American art. We've had several, and they've all done wonderful things. So with that being said, Charles, let's take a little trip and look at some of let's go to the map right now. I just want you to see what we're talking about. I have 2 maps here. This is kind of the illustrations are, I call them kind of cutesy-wootsy, and it's really hard to see, but I'm just showing it to you so that you can see the makeup of the various Native American tribes, and all across this mainland part, including Canada. The history of Native Americans, it's in terms of how they came to this particular place on Earth, from where did they come from? It's highly disputed. Simplistically, there were peoples who came possibly from Siberia, and we're talking Ice Age, the last Ice Age. And they walked for roughly, they're nomadic and hunters, and walked for roughly 1,000 years, continually heading south, west, east. This was not, this was an evolution, a total evolution. And depending like where you ended up, if you were on the northeast coast of this map, then you lived by using the natural resources of that particular area. Same thing goes for the southeast, where you see Seminole and the plains, which is the central portion where you see Pawnee, and the southwest, where you see Apache, Shoshone, and then California. And then above California, north of California, and then into what is the southern western area of the Canadian continent, which is known as the Northwest Coast. So the gallery that we were just in is now constructed in a way so that you can see the various regions, but also the categories of art, the pottery, the jewelry, the clothing, baskets. Baskets were major components. And we have old and new. And so among what we look at, we see very, very old pieces with some very beautiful contemporary pieces. And that having been said, the next map, Charles. So this is another map, Native American cultural areas. And I was talking about the various, the Southeast, the Great Plains. You can see, this is kind of hard to see. But if you imagine you look all the way north, the Arctic and the subarctic, including Alaska, and then the West Coast above California, Northwest Coast art. And all of these regions have numerous numbers of tribes and peoples that are all very, very different from each other, completely different from each other. By the way, the museum and where we are in northern New Jersey, we're sitting on what was inhabited by the Lenape people. And they are no longer in the area. Some of them, portions of them are, I believe, in the southeast portion now of the United States, but don't quote me. And that's because eventually with colonization and European exploration, they were pushed, as the years went, they were pushed away from their native area, and many of them wound up in Oklahoma. So there we have that. Let's look at the first piece. And this is in one of the first cases inside the museum. And this is the oldest piece in our entire collection. Native American, aside from that, this is the oldest piece owned by the museum. It was donated in 1934. Is it a new picture? No. It's a very old picture. You see circa 1200 AD. Southwest Ancestral Puebloan, which means it's from the Southwest, probably in the area of New Mexico, Arizona. It was a utilitarian ancestral. It says it's a utilitarian jar. It has, you can see it's quite weathered, and it is, you see imagery like almost like a Greek key design, but it's a very common design in much of Native American art. It is a little broken on the top, and it's a beautiful piece. You can see how worn it is. But that being said, those designs have been, they've lasted, they've been used and improved upon, and different materials and what have you for hundreds of years. So this is the tradition, and the imagery has remained the same. The condition and the materials have changed. This is clay and pigment most likely from native plants, which is the way things are done today as well. And then we move on to, so the next, we're going to go from this demonstration to a beautiful, more contemporary looking, it's currently in one of the vitrines that we saw as we walked in, this contemporary ceramic that's from the Santa Clara Pueblo, and that is in New Mexico. And there are many artisans who are part of the Santa Clara Pueblo. If you were to purchase something, it would say, if you turned it over, you would see the imprint, the name of the artist, and the fact that it is Santa Clara Pueblo. This is Jody Falwell, and she comes from a long line of pottery ceramicists and what have you. She, her sister, her mother Jody, born in 1942. This is called Sacred Lake, and it has, as you can see, a much more contemporary feel. And if the illustration, the colorization in this illustration is not the best, because if you were to actually see it, you would see that it is more like a sage celadon green, not really green, a little bit of yellow, but it's in relief. So you see the images raised, and those are fish. It's all about the afterlife. Sacred Lake, showing Pueblo symbols, and there's a frog at the top. I don't know if you can see, but at the top of it is a closure. There is a frog there who is a guardian of the spirit of the other world. She created this clay pot in commemoration, memorializing her father, who had passed away. And it's very, very ceremonial. Clay pigment. And one interesting thing to note about this was commissioned by the Montclair Art Museum when Jody Falwell fired the first pot. It actually cracked during firing. So when we saw the demonstration of firing those pots, you have to remember that these are fires that are not in a kiln. There it is a kiln that is put together with wood and cow manure, and it's fired outside. It's like anything else. You know by touch, by feel, by smell how high the temperature is. They're not putting a thermometer in there to see, how high is the heat. But you never know, as experienced as you may be, and you've done this over and over again, you never know. And so the first attempt, the pot cracked. All of these artisans know that when they do this firing method, there's most often there is a possibility, they hope it doesn't happen, but if you hear this little ping and this pop, you know that the pot has not survived. And so she did a second one after all that, even with the first one collapsing. And it's a very beautiful piece. The next, also the Falwells, this time Polly Rose Falwell. And this is a much more contemporary. It's called Ola, 1999. It's clay. And here, the interesting thing about this is that it's in the traditional shape, very traditional shape. And, but it has this kind of ancient look about it, because deliberately the top of the jar of this pot looks like it's broken, but it's done deliberately to depict the cracked surface of clay, the desert, the sun, the heat, the dryness, and all of those other elements that contribute to life in that particular area in the Santa Clara Pueblo. The paint is acrylic. It's not a pigment, a natural pigment coming from a native plant. And if you notice closely, although it really does have that traditional feel about it, the images are quite contemporary. I don't know if you can notice that, but there is a camera on the right. And Charles, maybe you can highlight that so we can see it. There's a camera, not a cell phone, not an iPhone camera, but a camera. And then to the left, there's an airplane, see the wings, and a bird flying right underneath, but with a lot of traditional elements. She does very, very playful things, and she uses a combination of traditional materials as well as man-made and contemporary materials. So that's Polly Rose Falwell. And it's a part of our collection. It won't always be on display, so we're very happy that you can see it today. And that being said, Charles, you want to go to the next? We are now we're going from pottery. We are going to get back, I think, a little bit to pottery at the very, very end. We go from pottery to beading. And the thing about beading, prior to colonialism, the coming of the European exploration, the Native American people used whatever resources they had growing, seeds, drying seeds, shells, depending on if they were near a water source. And these things were cut, they were polished, and what have you. These moccasins, when we see a lot, you see a lot of beading. Beading became extremely popular with the coming of the European exploration, because especially Spaniards brought these glass beads. So, and they came on little strings. And so they became very, very coveted by the native peoples. So this beading just took off in a completely different direction, and mostly done by women. These moccasins were, they're from the mid 1800s. The beads were, like I said, they're very, very small, and they're in horizontal rows. They're stitched in, and you can see the depiction to the right of the various symbols that are incorporated into these moccasins. Now, these were probably very ceremonial, and might have been for a child. And the reason that I say that is that while there is a lining of some sort of cured tanned hide, you cannot walk on a moccasin that has a beaded sole. It's not going to last very long. So this is purely for ceremonial use, but really, really beautiful. Lewis and Clark, the Lewis and Clark expedition brought the beads for the first time to the Native American population. And as I said, that was the case very, very often. The next, so these are from the mid 1800s, but the tradition lives on. And so we're going to look at something much more contemporary. We're looking at Chuck Taylor. These are Chuck Taylor basketball sneakers, and the artist is Terry Greaves. And the name of this particular design is the Gourd Dance. They're fully beaded. They were done in 2003, also from the Southwest. These are men's size 10. The beads, bugle beads, a variety of beads. And so he uses a contemporary piece of clothing and incorporates the idea of traditional beading and traditional designs. So you see various figures. They are, the reason that it's called gourd dance is there is a ceremonial dance using gourds that are dried and filled with seeds. And all the way on the illustration on the right, if you look at the sneaker furthest away from us, there are two figures, a small child in 2 shades of blue and a female figure. They have objects in each hand, and they are celebrating the gourd dance. And she does a tremendous number of different patterns that are whimsical. I wish we could get closer to see, but when you do look closely, you will see that these are rows of vertically strung small glass beads. There you go. And you can see that they're stitched in rows. They go in one direction horizontally, and then they go in the other direction as you get to the grommets and the laces. And they are extremely popular, as you can imagine, when we have young groups of kids walking through the museum, because it sort of takes them back. There's a tremendous sense of humor here. And another object portraying beading in the contemporary style is this cuff necklace done by Marcus Ammerman. And he loves to combine the traditional beading work with pop culture. And here what we're looking at is, you have to turn your head on the side because that's the way the image is. But if you look closely, you see that. And in fact, it is Wonder Woman in her bustier. And that's her head to the left, her midsection more to the middle. And what he's done here also is use traditional materials. So if you look inside where the blue border is behind, that is all hide glass beads and string. He in fact strings his beads beforehand. He is from the Choctaw Nation and from Oklahoma, and also one of his parents is Irish. And so he likes to challenge all kinds of assumptions about who he is and where what his origins are. And he has done a tremendous number of these. So it's really a lot of fun to look at something from the beginning, see the trajectory, see the origin of the beading, and then see where it's taken and where it's gone over time. And as we move on, so we're finished looking at beading. We're moving west now. If you think about the continent and the map, this is what is called a transformation mask. This is a very large piece, and it's quite large. It's hanging on the wall. It's called a transformation mask because the mask, where the center of the head is, it opens to reveal another image, another face. And it is actually worn. So you can imagine that it's very heavy. This one made circa 1984, Cherokee, and the peoples are known as the Kwakwaka'wakw. Cedar, pigment, Muslim, hair. The dimension is 40 inches by 40 inches, so you know it's quite large. And these would be worn during some sort of ceremony or celebration. Somebody would dance with this mask on, and the strings that are hanging down, manipulated by the person wearing the mask, so that the face would change, open and close. There's a little bit of a scary quality to it, but not really. And you see very typical images of what you find in Northwest Coast Native American art, the beaver, the raven, and the wind, all here. It's a very different look from when you look at it on the left, where you see a lot of blue and the eyes are slightly closed, and then pop, they open up, and you see this other image that almost has this like puzzle quality about it. And it looks partially human, partially animal-like. You would see a mask such as what I just showed you. And now if you just noticed some of the blankets that were worn, we go to this item, which is hanging in the gallery, not hanging, but in a display case in the corner. It's been there for quite a while. The artist is Lynn Kenyon, and this is a button blanket. This is a very contemporary button blanket, but we're talking about the area. When I say Northwest Coast, we're talking about the southern western portion of Canada, particularly British Columbia. And these button blankets became popular. The blankets themselves were worn by fur traders who came into the area and became very appealing to the indigenous people living there. And at first, they used shells and other reflecting objects that were growing and in the earth and whatnot, not necessarily growing, but they were honed and polished and shaped and applied to the wool. And then pretty soon along came these mother of pearl and abalone buttons, and that really took hold. And so groups and families spend a tremendous amount of time sewing these beautiful images in wool. You see red wool patches on black. They're full length, and all of that sparkly, the sparkly images are buttons, hence they're button blankets. They're worn, they're still worn, they're worn ceremonially. Sometimes they'll have the crest of a family apply to it, and you can also see the imagery. The imagery in this case, I believe it's a beaver in the central portion. Beavers are very popular in myths, and it would also be worn at something that maybe you've heard of, a potlatch. Potlatch ceremonies were very, very popular, and in fact, they still take place ceremonially. They're held to commemorate something in the life cycle, marriages, births, and deaths. And as you saw very briefly in that video clip, you see you see various people wearing these and dancing in them. And it's not something that's worn on the street, certainly. They're beautifully made, they're quite heavy. And with all of these objects, you can't just put it on the first time. You have to know what it feels like. And each family, each tribe will have its own special dance and ceremonies. Could be people watching and invited to watch. The potlatch ceremony has been around for a very, very long time. The next image that is also linked to the potlatch is this hat. It looks like, when I first looked at it in the case years ago, I thought it was beading, but looking closer, it's not, it's twine. So this is a potlatch hat. And you can see it was a gift from Florence Rand Lang in memory of her mother. This hat, made from cedar and pigment and twine, was worn by the host of the potlatch, who would invite a huge number of neighbors and friends and people in the surrounding area to a potlatch. And it would be a sign of a demonstration of prestige, family prestige. A person of high status would have worn this, and the people who attended the potlatch would have received gifts. So every ring where you see those blue rings going up that tube-like area, every ring stands for a potlatch that was held, sponsored by this particular family. And just like we're familiar with now, if you got invited to a potlatch, you were expected to be to reciprocate and invite that person and that family to your potlatch. This is also from the, I did say the Northwest coast. The people, the pronunciation is Haida. And you can still see that similarity in the imagery of the way there's a kind of a rectangular quality about all of their images that you see over and over and over again. And we will go on to look now at another basket, I believe. While we're, if you walked into the Rand Gallery, you would see on the right, and I'm hopeful many of you have, a tremendous collection of baskets from hundreds of years to more contemporary. Many of them were used, they had utilitarian use when these baskets were made. It had to be utilitarian, but it always had to be beautiful. And it was always made from locally growing regional plant material, bark, grass, wood, whatever was there. And it took a long time. This is a very tightly woven basket. It could probably be filled with liquid, and it would not drip from the bottom. Sometimes these baskets were used for fishing. Sometimes they were used to dry acorns, to dry plants, they had a whole slew of different purposes. This one in particular, you see also Northwest Coast, Chilcotin, and you see images of horses. And I just want to add that it's not just woven, it's something called umbricated, which means that there are steel wires that go around horizontally, and the grasses and the material are woven around these wires. This is a painstaking process. I want to add also that if you look in the cases of the case holding all of these baskets, you will see baskets that are maybe the size of a thumbnail, on a little teeny table in the corner. And they're made just using the same methods as a basket such as this. It always amazes me when I look at them that they are so minute in size, and yet if you had a magnifying glass with you and looked closely, you could see all the individual weaves in there. Those were actually made for the tourist trade. And we'll see another example right now. This is what I like to call the pièce de la résistance, the cream of the crop. This artisan was extremely popular. Her name was Elizabeth Hickox, Pomo tribe, California. This is a basket with lid. And it took her more than 2 years to complete. Elizabeth Hickox was a weaver for a long time, and this was designed also for the tourist trade because it emulates a European ceramic teapot, or maybe a sugar bowl. It's got a lid. The lid comes off. It has that beautiful knob at the top, and the weaving is so delicate and so fine, and you can see the material composed of ivory white grass, maidenhair fern, yellow quills, and all incorporated into that. It was known that she made, this one took her over 2 years, and it's so nice that we happen to have it. But it was known that she made maybe 4 to 5 baskets a year. She had a marketer. She had somebody who marketed her works, and her name was Grace Nicholson. And so she never really sold directly. She came to a point where she never really sold directly to the tourist trade. She would sell her work. Grace would commission her, and then Grace would go and sell the works to affluent collectors. There was a point, and I don't want to forget to mention this, there was a period in time especially on the East Coast in the United States, turn of the century, early 1900s, where it was known as basket fever. Native American, they didn't say Native American, but basket fever. And it was very she if you traveled west and you took a trip. This was not this was a big undertaking, and you came back with all of these beautiful baskets that you displayed them in maybe a parlor in your home or a sitting area, and you had a case, a curio case, or you hung them on the wall. We have a large photo in this particular case that shows somebody's display of baskets. So needless to say, this is highly skilled. She was a highly skilled weaver, and who did actually quite well for herself. Charles, I want to see what time. Okay, I want to go to Preston Singletary, to the glass. Here we go. And baskets, yes? Grass, no. Weaving, no. This is glass. This is Preston Singletary. This is installed on one of the walls in the Rand Undaunted Spirit exhibition. And there are 5 beautiful basket-like glass pots that have traditional designs that are etched. Preston Singletary, studied Italian glassmaking, traveled to many places where he learned how to blow glass and how to do these beautiful, intricate patterns. One is more beautiful than the other. And you do a double take when you first see them because it's the color. You think you're looking at a woven basket, and then you realize, no, it's not. It's glass. Do we have teas? And we've had Virgil Ortiz, The Odyssey of the Venusian Soldiers, on display at MAM for well over a year. And we didn't think that his work was going to be with us this long, but because of the pandemic, he was gracious enough to extend the time that the exhibit would be open. What you're looking at, let me just tell you something about Virgil Ortiz. He is a modern Renaissance man. He's from New Mexico, from a pueblo, the Cochiti Pueblo, Cochiti. He's in his early 50s at this point. He basically does everything. If you go to his website says, Virgil Ortiz, where art, culture, fashion, film, plus imagination collide. And he does incredible clay pots, fired in the traditional way in those open fires. He uses a particular kind of clay only from that particular area in the Pueblo, just like his ancestors did, his mother, his aunts. He has a sister who also does pottery. But he's also branched into this all from his imagination, because he said that when he was growing up, kids like him did not have any hero-like role models. And so he created this group of what he calls Venusian, not Venetian, Venusian, Venutiin soldiers. He has more than 19 or 20 characters. What you're looking at is a huge mural that he created just for the Montclair Art Museum. If you have been fortunate enough to see his work in the museum, you can have an idea of what I'm talking about. If you haven't, if you drive by the downside of the museum that faces St. Luke's Place, just around the corner from Bloomfield Avenue, there's a large glass wall and there's a huge staircase. This is inside the museum, and you will see this almost lifelike full-size mural that depicts some of his Venusian soldiers. Now, he's created all of the costumes, and the Odyssey that he's showing here is in the future. You can see some of these individuals are wearing masks, gas masks. How very appropriate. He wasn't thinking about a pandemic when he did this, but he was thinking about somewhere in the future. And what inspired him was something that happened in 1680, which was the Pueblo Revolt, which many refer to as the first American Revolution, in that particular part of the Southwest, where cultures had been dominated by Spanish explorers as far as Mexico and what have you. They were they had to submit to the Spanish and colonial rule. They couldn't practice their own traditions. They couldn't do a lot of things. And so there was a leader named Popay, Popay, who gathered together neighboring tribes, including some Apache as well. And they staged a revolt and overthrew Spanish rule. That lasted for a while, didn't last forever. So now Virgil has gone into the future where he has created these characters. They've come back to save the world from a catastrophic event. And this is just, if you look at some of these, you'll see female figures. These are models. He created the costumes. They're warriors, they're saviors. They have shields, they have spears. This one character at the very end on the left looks like kind of reptilian. He's very sparkly. And this thing is lit from behind. So if you pass by and you stand there for a while, especially at sundown or when it's dark, you'll see the changing background. You'll see lightning streaks, which I think Charles is going to show us right now. There we go. Their shoes, constructing, you're seeing construction of this mural, which is gigantic, and a close-up shot, just some of the portions of it. He is planning on, he's been planning for a long time to do a full-length feature film using real-life actors dressed in costumes designed and created by him. And there are some video clips available to view. You can see some of them inside the museum. Each character has a different name. It's incredible that has done such a detailed, extensive, thorough recreation. And that's Virgil's logo. As I said, he does a lot of different things. In fact, he even has designed masks. I'm lucky enough to have one. And if you look, you see that turquoise cross image. That is his trademark. If you look at some of his pottery, you will always see this crosshatch, which is reminiscent of a trotting turkey that's always in motion. So this is like the bottom of the turkey's claw, the footprint. And you always look for that when you look at Virgil's pots. Virgil had his work in the Indian market for years and years and years out in Santa Fe. And about 15, 18 years ago, during one of those markets when we had his work out there, who should come by but Donna Karen, who was absolutely struck by the beauty of these pieces of pottery and the designs that he was using. She got in touch with him and she'd offered him a job. He didn't believe her. She offered him the opportunity to come to New York City and work with her to design fabrics, and which he did for quite a while. So he is quite an entrepreneur and the nicest person you can imagine. He is a mentor of children of all ages. And there is a school in the Cochiti Pueblo where they speak a language called Keres, which it is their language. They speak it only. Nobody else is allowed to learn the language. And we're now working with the Keres Child Learning Center to bring to them some of our works and some art lessons with them. So as I leave you with this, I just want to mention Virgil has donated one of his beautiful ceramic pots to the museum, and we're having the first ever raffle tonight at 6 p.m. The winning ticket will be drawn The jar pot is one of his designs. It has one of the images of this Venusian soldier on the pot. Its value is around $4,500 to $5,000. Tickets have been sold, and I think it's too late now to buy one. And there's going to be a virtual drawing tonight at 6 o'clock, and some lucky individual is going to get this beautiful, beautiful piece of art. So in a nutshell, and I'm sorry for the delay, I've taken you through and shown you and talked about just some of a kind of tip of the iceberg of the Native American collection, this undaunted spirit that continues today. And you know, it's a sobering thing. This is a culture, a group of, we can't even call it one culture, that has kept on flourishing despite tremendous setbacks and oppression over hundreds and hundreds of years. So we value having these works in our collection. And as I said, we're ever striving to make it more politically correct, more also hands-on, and I hope you come and visit. The museum is open, and if you come, you can go online and get yourself a timed ticket. We have a new show, a new exhibit that is going to be opening this coming weekend, the 5th and 6th of February. It's called Fragile Freedoms, the work of Maggie Miners, and it has a tremendous tie-in with the works of Norman Rockwell. So there will be a few of Rockwell's works in the exhibition. I hope you come and see it, and have a wonderful afternoon.